Next up are images, because a web page typically becomes a little bit boring to look at without some sort of visual other than text. As we've discussed before, images are typically surrounded with the image tag. You can see that I've got an image selected here, and the image tag is in blue. An image tag's primary property is the source code of the photo or picture. And this is what the SRC represents. Basically, this little line of text tells the web page exactly where to look in order to locate that image. So it's sourcing the images folder, which I've got right here, and then it breaks down which image it is that is getting used. So in this case, it's the 3V dot GIF. And if you hover over that, it'll actually give you a preview of what we're dealing with. It's actually on a transparent background, as you can see. If I change the background of the web page, the background of the image would alter also. To insert an image, it's relatively simple. We covered it previously, but I'll go over it again here. Click in the web page elsewhere. It can be in your code, or if you are in design mode, you can add in a paragraph to get you started, but just click where you want to place that image and just go to insert, and image is right up at the top because it is a common object. It will inquire which one of these images do you want to use. You click one, you hit OK, and it will bring that image in. This is a photo of Kevin Bacon made out of bacon. You can also come up to insert and pick image here as well. I like the insert panel myself, just it's always visible. I don't have to click extra places to access it, but it's a personal preference. Now, at times, you'll be designing a web page and you may not have an image to start from. You know where you'd like to put an image, but perhaps you don't have that image on hand at the moment. Past versions of Dreamweaver allow you to add a placeholder image to your documents. Now, I don't have a placeholder image present as an insert panel, but it's very easy to produce a placeholder image. Grab any old image you want. I'm going to just get this image as an example here. You can see I get some weird stuff going on. I'll fix that momentarily. An easy way to alter this to represent a placeholder image is to just remove the source code. So the source, this part, and then where it names the image, just delete that. What that's going to do is that is going to leave you a placeholder object, and it will maintain the height and width in pixels of that image that you brought in. So if you wanted to alter, cleaning up my code a little, so if you wanted to alter the shape of this, perhaps instead of 512 by 512, maybe I just want a 300 pixel box by 300, 30. There we go. So that can give you the opportunity to put a placeholder in wherever you need it to make sure that you are at least designing the text to factor in dimensions. I edited them in the code, but when you click on it, you'll notice that the image placeholder pops up. It looks a little bit different from the image, but you can also alter the width and height here as well. And again, that is in pixels. Percentages gets weird. It starts to stretch your image. I don't recommend using percentages as a unit of measurement. You can also alter the color of your placeholder. Not that that should matter very much. You know, it is going to be replaced by an image at some point in time. Once you find an image that you'd like to put in that section, here's your source content right here. So again, you can access it the same way that you would otherwise. You can type it in manually, you can browse the file, or you can point to a file. Now, if the image that you point to is bigger than the placeholder box, it's going to fill that box up and match the size of whatever that document happens to be. Let's see if I have a slightly smaller. Oh, back to Kevin Bacon. There are 3 major image types that you are going to run into. These are JPEG files with the .jpg or .jpeg extension. There's the GIF files, GIF, and there's the PNG files, the .pngs. Each one of these formats functions a little bit differently. There are multiple type of file formats, but these 3 tend to be the easiest types to use for the web and the smaller ones. JPEGs you probably have the most experience with. These are an acronym. JPEG stands for Joint Photographic Experts Group. And these file types, this is like a photo, like this one, they support millions of different colors. So these are ideal for photographs, but if you're dealing with a simple graphic with limited colors, JPEGs tend to be a little bit larger of a file size than necessary. GIF files, and I believe that our dancing bacon is a GIF. These are unique in that they support only a maximum of 256 shades of color. So generally speaking, if we were to save a photograph as a GIF file, it would look choppy. But one of the nice things about GIFs is that they support transparency and they can be animated, which is why we've got our little dancing bacon here. GIF stands for Graphics Interchange Format, and these are great for compression and large areas of solid color. So think logos, text, simple banners, etc. Lastly is the PNG or the PNG. This is a acronym for Portable Networks Graphic. And this kind of combines the best features of GIFs and JPEGs in that they do support transparency, but they also support large amounts of color and are typically relatively decent in file size. But in general, JPEGs tend to be a better choice for photos that include lots of colors. So just to kind of give a visual in terms of the file size difference, I'm opening up Photoshop and I've produced a very basic bacon illustration. You don't need Photoshop for this class, but it can be helpful, especially if you've taken digital imaging with me previously. You may already have access to it. So for saving for web, I'm going to go to File, Export, and there's an option that says Save for Web Legacy. This is a slightly older window setting, but this can kind of break down specifically why each of these file types is different. So I've clicked my 4 up, and what this does is it breaks the windows into 4 separate sections. I've got my original, which is my bacon.psd Photoshop document, and I've got 3 separate GIFs. Now I'm going to actually alter these file types to be a little bit different from one another. So now I've got a GIF, I selected JPEG and I altered that. I selected the PNG and I've altered that. Now with GIFs, they have a limited number of colors that they can use. Right now, they're giving me quite a few colors. I want to narrow the color choices down. So up here, colors 256. I've only used 2 shades of red, pink, so I'm going to narrow that down to 2. Now you can see it doesn't give me quite what I'm looking for, so I'm going to adjust that So set that to 4 colors as opposed to the full 256. Now look at the differences in these file types. We've got 709 kilobytes for this particular image, which is the Photoshop document. This GIF is only 2.271 kilobytes. And it gives you a breakdown of how long it would take to load at a certain connection speed. Same thing with the ping, same thing with the JPEG. So you can see that in this instance, out of these 3 file types, GIF would be the most simplistic version of file. So I would want to save it as a GIF. So I would click Save. I would tell it where I'd like it to save. I called it bakinggraphic.gif. It's going to show me other GIF files that are present, so I'll click Save. And if I open that up, it saved that as a GIF file because that was what I had selected. Just to give you a similar visual in terms of what GIFs do to photographs, I'll do the same thing here. Export, save for web. Now each one of these is a GIF file, and I'll go ahead and pick 256. It actually does a pretty decent job with this image because it's only using the reds and the oranges and the browns. But you can see if I narrow down the number of colors, it starts to dramatically impact the visual. And if this were an image with more colors, it would look a lot more pixelated, even in the 256 version. It would start to look probably somewhat like this, just because the eye can recognize a much higher spectrum of colors in the JPEG as opposed to in the GIF file. So I'll click Cancel. I'll leave Photoshop for now. Now, one of the nice things about, I'll get rid of this particular image. One of the nice things about Dreamweaver and Photoshop, especially if you're using them together, is that because they are both Adobe products, they can work with one another quite well. So if, hypothetically, I were to insert an image and instead of picking a JPEG or a GIF or a PNG, I were to just grab the Photoshop document, I could hit OK. And it's going to ask me, how do I want to import this file type? Do I want it as a JPEG? Do I want it as a PNG? Do I want it as a GIF? What am I wanting to do? And all of these give me some similar options that the Save for Web option in Photoshop offered. So I do have the ability to alter my palette, for instance, I think. Now you can see it doesn't give me quite the same result, but it does give me some options, and it does allow you to see what sort of file size you're dealing with. So I'll click OK. It asks me to save it because it is making a copy of that Photoshop document, and it's asking you to save it into your web page. So I'll just go ahead and overwrite my previous breaking graphic. I'll say save and yes. And now that's brought in. Now just for a side-by-side, I am going to insert a standard image as well. And I'm going to go ahead and just delete all my p tag tidbits that aren't necessary. There we go. Now, both of these image types can be modified in the Properties panel. You can attach a link to it, making it clickable. You can apply a style class or an ID to it, and you can even produce an image map so that different areas on the image pertain to, can act as a link to different locations. Now, with the ID, most of the time you're going to leave this blank, but if you plan to add any interactive effects, like a rollover effect, which we will cover later, you will need to add an ID in order to make that tidbit of JavaScript that is necessary to make a rollover effect active. So Under most circumstances, the ID section will be left blank. As we mentioned previously, adding a description of some sort, especially if you're wanting to assist web surfers that perhaps want to know more about your image, especially if they're using a screen reader. The alt property can let you add a little bit of a description about the image. It's similar to giving it a title, but not identical. An image's size. We talked about altering the width and height here, or altering the width and height here. Now, watch what happens if I go to maybe alter this shape and size. You'll notice how I've squished the width, but the height remains the same. And as a result, it's beginning to kind of compress those pixels. And if I over compress those pixels, I can wind up with something that's not very attractive. It's also easy to just grab the top or the bottom or the side and manually squish some of these. And while that's easy, you are more likely to cause, again, pixel problems. So whenever you alter the size of your image, make sure that this little lock icon shows the lock is being closed, not open. If I hover over that, you'll see toggle size constraint. So basically what that means is it will try, not when you grab the corners, but it will try when you're down here to keep the sizes the same. So if I do need to alter this to be a smaller size, it will update both sides complementary to one another to make sure that there is as little loss or distortion of the information as possible. Something to keep in mind is if you do need a big version, I'll type in 900 as a value. Keep in mind that typing in dimensions larger than the graphic is just going to distort it by stretching, and eventually you can start to see that I'm getting some pixelation that's occurring. If you want an image that's big without distortion, you must start with a larger image size. So as you do your research, I'll just type in bacon as a search. I'll click on images. As you do your research for photographs of bacon, click tools and then click size. The larger the images, the more flexibility you will have when using that image's content. So if I were to click and then click view image, and then see how my cursor has a little magnifying glass on it, click again. That's how big that image actually is. So if you know that you're going to need a large image, don't start with something that's small and then stretch it to fit, because the distortion is going to make that image look less than ideal. And when it comes to the assignments, it will begin to affect your grade. We don't want that. So make sure you are resourcing the largest possible content that you could find. You can always shrink something and have it look decent, but making it larger, not the case. Now, we lightly covered how we can alter images using CSS in a prior lecture. I'll click over to Designer, I'll click the Style, and I'll click my image tag and show set. So we talked about that float property, and we can alter the float between left and right. So it's just going to relocate how that image is set up amongst other items. In general, you probably won't want to use a tag style like the image tag here, because that's going to affect every image on a page. So if I had some sort of decorative logo up at the top, it's going to affect that image in addition to every other image on that page. So classes is going to be where it's at in terms of fine-tuning where content is going to go. I'll go ahead and make a class. I'm going to call it bacon image left. There we go. Bacon image left. And I will float that guy left. Now, in a previous lecture, I did discuss how we could add borders to an image. You can add sort of a frame around a photograph, just like you can add borders around any HTML item that's visual. I'll pick a color. I'll pick something that kind of stands out. It's not going to be pretty, but you'll be able to see it. There we are. Now, not in every instance will you want to have a border around an image, but if you've got a gallery, it can help unify content. If I wanted to add a border to this one as well, I would just apply that class also. Now, with this particular bacon image, there's a section here called border radius. This allows for you to round off the corners of your border using this property. So you'll choose a number representing pixels, or you can click right here in the center to sort of link. See how the links went from being broken to linked? It's similar to clicking the little padlock here. This makes sure that all the corners maintain the same size equally. Now, you won't see this in design mode. This is something you'll have to preview in live. And it doesn't seem to be wanting to show me it there, so I'll go ahead and preview that in a browser. Now, 15 pixels doesn't give much of a rounded corner. It's very subtle. The more you increase that number, the more rounded it will appear. And if you get high enough, it will eventually show you a circle as opposed to a square image. This varies based on how large the image is. Let's do 200. There we go. But you can see, and I know I've kind of compressed my screen here a touch, but you can see how we went from having a boxy appearance to having a circular appearance here by altering that border radius property. So it can be a fun way to alter how some of your images look. We talked about background images briefly. You can apply a color. Now, given I do need to change where I'm located, I did apply this to my bacon image left, so it's actually a background behind this photo. That's not what I want, so I'll delete that here. But the body tag is where I want to add this because I want it to pop up behind all of this content. So now I'll pick a background color. There we go. And you can see this GIF does recognize that transparency. That's why it doesn't have a white box around it. Background image. You can make any image type a background image. If I were to pick a GIF that has animation and throw on live, my background image is going to dance. Now, it's not the late 90s. This isn't a MySpace page. I would not recommend this. It's way too busy and it's going to irritate anyone that's browsing your web page. So I don't recommend going that route. Can you do it? Yes. Is it a good idea? Questionable at best. So let's swap that out. An image like this when it has seams like this where you can see one image kind of attaching to the next one, this is where it's being tiled, and it's not, again, it's better than a moving image, but it makes the text very difficult to read, just because that image itself is difficult to read against. It's very dark and busy. Now, you do have the ability to control how it repeats. You can have it repeat horizontally or vertically. This can be great if you're having an image sort of tile across the top as a faux header. You can have it appear only a single time, so clicking on repeat, it's going to repeat forever. Another property you might use is the background attachment. If I had this on a long web page, and I'll come over here, you can see how the background moves as I scroll. Background attachment, setting that to fixed, means that the content scrolls over that image. So perhaps if an image is long enough to fit the length of a web page, but perhaps doesn't tile nicely, like this one's kind of giving us an issue with, you can set it to fixed and the content floats over that background image, which can give you a little bit more flexibility. Background positioning. Using the horizontal and vertical settings for the background image, these guys, you're specifying a position for that image within the body tag, but you can apply numeric values for the position as well, like left, right, center, and that can kind of help control it a little bit easier. It's not going to make much of a difference here. There we go. So left, right, center. I had to tell it not to repeat. And now it's centered based on the location of that, the length of that HTML document. So that can help fine tune a little bit as well. There's a long list of different units of measurement here that you can use. Pixels, percentages, or like relative location typically is going to be your best options there. Go ahead and delete that background. Another thing that you can keep in mind, and this is located under background, is you can actually add a shadow. So I'll pick black as my color. I need to do this on the proper selector. That's one of the biggest things to remember, is don't just start changing until you make sure you're selecting the right item to make that change to. There we go. Wasn't showing up at first, but I added shadows, H and V, horizontal and vertical. Spread shows how much bigger it's going to appear than the image itself. You can see that this isn't going to appear in design or a live mode, but if you do preview it in a browser, the browser will display it as you expect. And blur is going to soften that. So if I wanted it to appear a little less dramatic, maybe a gray shadow versus a black shadow, that can really impact that visual and kind of add some faux three-dimensionality that wouldn't be there otherwise. Now, editing these images. We talked about changing the width and height, but there are several other tools available to you down here as well. And I'm going to switch to a page with a more substantial image present. And I'm going to just shrink him slightly. There we go. Now, to use those tools, you notice some of them aren't visible. You have to be in design mode in order for all of those options to pop up. At any time, if you want to alter the file type of an image, you can click Image Settings. It looks like these two little gears, and it will open this up and let you alter it. Would a GIF be more appropriate than a JPEG? You'll also notice here I have a crop tool. This tool can remove extra or distracting parts of an image. If we look at this bacon image, there's a lot of empty space around it. So if I wanted to narrow that, I could click the crop tool to alter that. Now it is giving me a little bit of extra content. It's going to be the smart object will be detached. I'm going to click no for now. Basically what that means, if we look at this icon up here in the upper left-hand corner, if you recall, this is attached to that Photoshop document. This is just a regular old JPEG that we brought in. So what this is doing is it's asking us, it recognizes that the Photoshop document is controlling it. If I were to make a change to that bacon graphic that I produced, trying to separate Photoshop there. Okay. If I wanted to make this a different color of bacon, maybe instead of this shade of pink, I want a lighter shade of pink. And I'm just going to change the color of the bacon like that. And I'll click Save. And it saved my Photoshop document. So now I'll come over to Files, and I'm just going to hit Refresh. You'll notice that the little arrows, they were both dark, and now one's light and one's dark. And if I hover, it says the original asset is modified. What that means is the original file that sampled this color bacon is no longer the same as the one that's visible here. So this little icon down here, it lets me update from the original. I click that, and it makes the change for me. I don't have to worry about resaving it or exporting it or doing anything extra. It's telling me that now this file and this file are showing or displaying the same content. So when I tell it I want to crop you, it's saying that it's going to disconnect this GIF from being recognized by the bacon graphic. So if I do make a change to the Photoshop file, this file is not going to recognize it. But that's what it's asking me to do if I need to crop it. If I needed to make that change, theoretically the best way to do it would be to do so in Photoshop and do the cropping here. But since I know not everyone's using Photoshop, I'll do the cropping in Dreamweaver. So I'll say yes. It will permanently alter the selected image. I will say okay. Now it's going to let me kind of crop. So I'm just getting a lot of this excess white space out of the way. I'll hit return to set it. You can see that it dramatically altered the width and height, but I was able to crop out extraneous content that wasn't necessary. You can see that if I decide I would like to edit it, it will open any image in Photoshop for you to alter. Now, something to keep in mind is resampling. If you recall, this image was much larger. I'll go ahead and import the original just so you can see them side by side. I'll click and drag. That's another way you can import is just grab it from files. So here's the original size of the document, and I shrink it. Now, the problem that comes there is if you've ever gone to a web page that had a large image and it takes time to scroll to kind of load the full image, sometimes that happens even on small photographs. And the reason that that happens is you've shrank the image in Dreamweaver, but it's referencing a much larger version that could affect load time. So there's an icon down here. It's got a little picture graphic with a little circular arrow next to it. And if you hover over it, it says resample. So what resampling does is it will resize and basically save your original document to match these dimensions to make sure that you don't have any problems with load time. So clicking that icon will permanently alter the selected image. I will say OK. And now this image, just in terms of size, the size of the file itself, will now load more quickly. And you can see if I drag that one in, now it's now the same size that we altered it to be by resampling. Brightness and contrast, these are going to allow us to brighten or increase contrast of whatever images that we have. They aren't super accurate, but it does give you an idea that you can make some small adjustments. You can also see that my file here updated as well. I don't like that, so I'm going to click cancel. Sharpen. This allows you to make the image more crisp. This can cause some pixelation problems, so I do not recommend cranking it all the way up. But it can take an image that perhaps appears blurry and just bring out a little bit of sharpness. If you did take digital imaging previously with me, I do expect you to use Photoshop to do your editing, because while there are small ways to edit within Dreamweaver, they're far from being high quality changes. These are just to be done if there's small alterations. Image maps. Mentioned that previously in the beginning. Let's say we have this photo and we would like to make just a portion of it a clickable item. You can make any image a link, but maybe I don't want the whole picture to be clickable. Maybe I just want his face to be clickable. Down here in the lower left-hand corner are image maps. What these do is this allows you to make essentially a clickable hotspot that can be edited. So there's one that's shaped like a square and one that's shaped like a circle. His face isn't really either of those. I could probably click and drag like a, no, it won't even let me make an oval, just a circle. Let's see what I can do here. So I can expand the shape and the size, and that blue highlighted area is the clickable area, and this is where I'm able to link it. You can see that it does place a map tag in there. I actually don't care for the circular one. I would like to use this polygon hotspot tool. This lets you kind of click and show where all the points are that you'd like to incorporate. So this can give you a little bit more precision, just the face, and I included his neck too. If I make points that shouldn't be there, you'll have to hit delete and kind of start over. There's not an easy way to do that. And the pointer hotspot lets you make alterations to what's there. So I'll grab my little pointer hotspot. So I can fine tune the location of some of those points if I need to, or relocate the whole thing. So now that region would be clickable. In this instance, it's kind of a silly example, but say if you had a map and you wanted the map to be clickable. Let's see, bacon map. Okay, so not a high quality image, but if you wanted to, you know, take this image of a pig's body and map out where bacon is located, or any cut of meat rather, you could do that by using those hotspot tools to include each area and then have it lead you to another location. And actually, if you recall the named anchor that we produced, those anchors that would let us click on the navigation and then scroll to another spot, that would actually be a very clever way to manipulate or use this particular icon to act as a navigational tool. With objects like that, the alt property is important. Oftentimes people will not realize that there is a hotspot in an image unless they scroll over it accidentally. So if you were going to use this sort of tool, you would definitely want to incorporate something like instructions, such as to move further, click on Kevin Bacon's face, something like that. And now rollover images. This can be nice because it can give you sort of an interactive element to play with on the web, sort of like how we had produced initially some rollover content for our navigation. See how we've got just a color change there? But if you wanted to make it more dramatic, maybe have an image change color or have one image swap out with another, you can turn any image into a rollover image. So in order to do that, click outside of that image because we're going to create a new one. And on the insert panel, it's not by the regular image. We're going to scroll down a bit. And rollover image is actually towards the bottom. So I'm going to click it. And it will open up a separate window. I'm going to give it a name. And you're going to pick the image that it's going to start with and the image that you'd like it to change to when the cursor rolls over it. So we'll say, we'll start with my sad illustrated bacon, and I want it to turn into some slightly nicer vector bacon. And I'll click OK. Alternate text, you can describe whatever's going on here. And you can make it clickable. When click, go to URL, and then you can type in the location of a file. You can type in an absolute URL. It's whatever your personal preference is. So I'll say OK. So now when I hover over it, you can see that it changes anytime I hover anywhere near or over the space that is taken up there. Now again, rollover images, you're not going to be able to use them on a mobile device, again, because the cursor doesn't roll over, just like you would have an issue dealing with the navigation rollover. But it is a nice way to add a little bit of interactivity if you're looking to convey an idea or just grab somebody's attention.